then we can. Excellent. Thanks.
Great stuff. Thank you, Chris. And thank you once again for giving up your lunchtime to come and listen to this talk. I've called this talk Head in the Clouds because as someone who is a weather geek, I am completely obsessed by the weather. I always have been. And I'm sure it might be the same for you, whatever sort of branch of science it is you do, whatever work it is you do, you might be, really excited about what it is that you do every day. But there's kind of very little point in that excitement if you're not able to communicate that to a wider audience. And that's kind of what my job is all about. It's no good me just having my head in the clouds, so to speak. I've got to find ways of telling weather stories to a wider audience in a way that they're going to be able to use and benefit from, and hopefully that will help them make better decisions. And I'm sure this is allied with the work that a lot of you guys are doing as well. I'm Ben Rich. I'm one of the lead weather presenters at the BBC. It means I present weather across all of the BBC national channels, so BBC One, BBC News Channel, radio stations, various others as well. So you'll see and hear me popping up all over the place with my colleagues as well. And my interest in weather started from a very early age. In fact, when I was 5 years old, I always wanted to be a weather forecaster. I don't really know why. I guess growing up in Devon, the weather changed all the time, and I sort of wanted to know why. And also, I was, well, my mum and I would watch the 1 o'clock news on TV every afternoon. And for some reason, the bit that I found most interesting and exciting, and the bit I really wanted to see, was the weather forecast. I was always interested in maps and always interested in the weather, so it kind of felt like the right way to go. And yes, my school did give me a certificate for best weatherman. The date on that, I think, is 2001, which makes me a little bit older than I'd like to admit when I got that certificate. But that was just the beginning, and I kind of had to make this into a career. Now, my initial plan was to go and study meteorology at university and go into it from a science perspective. But unfortunately, I wasn't good enough at maths A level to do a meteorology degree. So I had to sort of take a different track, as you sometimes do in life. And so I did a BA in geography at the University of Southampton, and then a master's in broadcast journalism, which I did at Falmouth in Cornwall. So that kind of gave me the two sort of foundation stones, the science side, the communication side. And that's kind of what I took forward then. So I became a journalist, reporter, newsreader, presenter on local commercial radio, which I did for a couple of years. And then the BBC were advertising for weather presenters who needed to be weather geeks, basically, but didn't necessarily need to be trained meteorologists. And they needed presenters for every region of the UK. There was an expansion going on at that time. And so I applied for every job from Plymouth in the southwest to Glasgow to Belfast. I just wanted one of the jobs, and I moved to Birmingham to go and work at the BBC there, presented the weather on Midlands Today and local radio for 4 years, and then decided I really wanted to focus in on my weather. So I joined the Met Office, trained as a meteorologist at long last, worked for a while in aviation forecasting. I worked with some pilots at RAF Northolt in northwest London, which was a very different style of science communication, very different customer, if you like. They had very different needs compared with the sort of broader needs of the TV and radio audience. They wanted much more specific information about where they were going. So that was quite a challenge in itself. And then I circled back, rejoined the BBC, and that is where I am now. And I've been here, well, on and off for about 10 years in this job, but doing it full time since 2016. So in a nutshell, my job is to take the complex science of weather forecasting, and we don't have time to go into exactly how we make a weather forecast, but I'm sure it's something a lot of you are well aware of. But in a sort of nutshell, we take a whole set of observations from all over the world. So we see, ground-based observations of temperature, rainfall, sunshine amounts, various other parameters. Couple that with things like satellite imagery, radar imagery, observations from buoys at the sea, out at sea, observations from planes flying high aloft, and you put all of that information into a computer model which runs all of the calculations, all of the sums in the supercomputer, and comes out with a weather forecast in the form of computer modeling, basically. In the top right of the screen there, you can see a computer model forecast for the jet stream. the core of strong winds in the center of the jet stream, and then also in the bottom left, you can see temperatures about 5,000 feet in the atmosphere. All really interesting information, but my job is to take all of that and turn it into something that our audiences can use on radio and on TV. You're sort of trying to take all of that data, simplify it, pick out the best bits, the most important bits, and really sort of focus that message into something that can fit into a broadcast that might only be a minute long. Our longest broadcasts are 3.5 minutes long. And so it is quite a challenge kind of picking out the best bits to put in the weather story. You'll hear me talk a lot about the weather story. That is really what it's all about. It's about telling stories. And I guess that's one of the reasons that I love it so much. And these days, it's not just about standing in front of the map anymore. That's still kind of a key part of the job, but also it might be out and about reporting. So I did a piece a couple of weeks ago where we filmed with the Met Office and others about winter weather and climate change. It could be on the set of the 10 o'clock news talking about some world weather event. That was talking about the one on the screen there about a hurricane that passed to the south of Hawaii and strengthened the winds and brought the wildfires there some time ago. And it might be writing articles for the website. So the job has certainly expanded in recent times in line with where our audiences are, because that's kind of where we have to be. If we want to tell our weather story, we have to know where our audiences are. We have to reach them in every place that they are. So a bit of a sort of day in the life. The first thing that happens when I get into the office, well, if it's 4 o'clock in the morning, which it sometimes is, the first thing would be a cup of coffee. But then I will get a weather briefing delivered by my colleagues who work for DTN, Meteo Group, who are the forecast company that provide our weather data, and they will brief me on the weather story. So all the complicated model stuff that I showed you earlier on, we'll have a bit of that. Listen for about 15 minutes to what the story is meteorologically. And you can see on the screen there, these are what we call the 6-ups, because there are 6 of them. And we have frames like that that just sort of display the model data. And that is my kind of quick reference guide for everything I then go on to do, because the next thing I have to do is to prepare the broadcasts. And you may or may not know that weather presenters, meteorologists on TV, prepare their own weather graphics using a system that we have at the BBC called Weather Presenter. Other broadcasters have their own graphic systems. And it is basically just like making a PowerPoint presentation. You're choosing which different bit of information you want, how long you want it to be on the screen for. So, for example, we might put a headline for the day ahead, for the week ahead. Maybe satellite or radar tells the story. So if the satellite picture has a beautiful hook of cloud, that might be the best way to tell the story. Or if that doesn't look very good, well, maybe a pressure chart would be a better start to the story to kind of set the scene. And then we get a lot of pictures from viewers as well. We have a thing called Weather Watchers, where viewers send in the pictures of the weather wherever they are. That's a really useful tool for us as well. It's like being able to look out of the window in Aberdeen or in Aberystwyth. And so we put all of that together into a presentation, and then we obviously make that into a broadcast. Now, on a shift, one of the questions I get asked most often is, sorry if I've stolen your question, is what do you do between broadcasts? Because people might only watch one. They might watch the 6 o'clock news, for example, and then they don't see me again. Well, we actually do between 15 and 20 broadcasts on every shift. So it's pretty busy, and those broadcasts won't always be the same. They won't all be the same. So there's BBC Breakfast, 1, 6 and 10 o'clock news. Those are our sort of flagship TV broadcasts. But then we also have the BBC News Channel, which has world weather broadcasts. So we record weather broadcasts that go out all around the world, one for each continent. If you stay in a hotel abroad and watch BBC News, you will see those go out. Also on radio, Radio 4, Radio 5 Live. And then on top of that, anything else that might be going on the particular day. So if there's some big weather story, we might have to cover that online or in some other way. And the thing about this is that, you know, I talk about the weather story, but actually you have to come up with various different weather stories, because obviously the weather on radio is different compared with the radio on TV, and the different audiences have different needs and expectations as well. So the Radio 4 audience we always think as being a little bit older broadly, a little bit more kind of traditional in the way they want the information delivered, whereas sometimes 5 Live is a bit like having a chat down the pub. You know, it's much more much more light and light-hearted and informal. Also, the broadcasts on 5Live are actually much shorter. So there's a lot of different things to think about. I take that weather story, I'm thinking, what are the main things I want to get through, and how do I tailor that to all the different audiences I need to hit? Now, in terms of actually delivering the broadcast, well, this is not particularly glamorous, actually. This is one of our green screen studios. We've got 2 of those here at Broadcasting House in London. I'm sure I don't need to explain how green screen works. It's how weather forecasts have been done for many a year now, for decades, actually, since I think the 80s. And the reason we use it is because it's a really cheap way of projecting graphics onto a screen. As you can see from that picture, the studio is very small. There's no camera operator, there's no crew making this happen, there's no lighting technician. I walk into the studio, I press a button on a touch screen, and it sets itself to my settings. The camera moves to my height, the lighting moves to my setting, depending on the sort of tone in my face. And there's no script either, so there's no auto cue. News presenters would use auto cue. We don't have auto cue. Instead, what I will see on the screen in front of me, on the camera actually, where the auto cue would be, is me with the map, and I use that to sort of know where I'm pointing, although it is flipped in reverse from what you'd expect, which does take some getting used to. A lot of people are surprised to learn that we don't have a script, but actually I find it kind of easier to talk without a script. It allows you to draw the viewer into your story, to also refer to the graphics going on behind you. But what that means, you might think, well, how do you remember the information? Actually, that goes back to preparing the weather graphics. While I'm doing that, I'm always thinking, well, what am I going to be saying at this point? What words do I want to be using? What's the message I want to get across? So a bit like making a PowerPoint presentation, you're thinking, what is the message with every individual slide? In the studio, I start the graphics with the clicker. And the way we tend to set them up, there's no pauses in the graphics. We know how long we've got. Might be a minute, might be 3.5 minutes, or somewhere in between. But I set up that amount of graphic sequence, press the button, away it goes. There's no stopping it. There's no going back. So you kind of have to keep up with what you've put in your broadcast. Talkback is what we call the earpiece in our ear, and through that you'll be hearing the director in the gallery for live broadcasts. And not only the director either, there might be a producer, there might be a sound person, and you are in some circumstances not only hearing what they're trying to say to you, you are hearing everything that's going on. So you've got all of that going on. You have to sort of block it out, but equally some of it might be for you. So it might be, oh, we need to cut your time. That happens sometimes. Or it might be take a step to the left. You're not quite in the right place. You've got to filter out the bits that are for you and not get too distracted. And the worst thing is when someone asks you a question or something that would demand an answer. So, you know, they might say, oh, you've only got 30 seconds left. And you might want to say, that's okay, but you obviously can't do that. And then weather on radio is obviously a completely different beast. No pictures, no graphics. So that really is an exercise in painting pictures and telling weather stories. So it's all about the medium and all about the audience. So what is it we're actually trying to get across in our weather story? I sort of see it as being a two-faceted thing. The first thing, obviously, is will you need a raincoat, your umbrella? Will you need sun cream? What's the weather going to do today, tomorrow? It's kind of the traditional thought of the weather forecast. It's the kind of light-hearted bit at the end of the news. That's what it kind of always used to be. And it still is to a great extent. But the other part of that is, you know, the sort of the more important bit really is the weather going to harm you? Is it going to disrupt your life? We have an obligation here at the BBC to broadcast the Met Office's weather warnings. They're obviously issued to keep people safe, to keep people abreast of big and impactful weather events that are coming. On national BBC broadcasts, we always show the amber ones and the red ones. The yellow ones you'll see on your regional weather broadcasts. Also Environment Agency flood warnings. And we do sort of these days try to tap into not only what the weather's going to do, but the impact of what the weather's going to do. And so, for example, yesterday was talking with a colleague, I was on shift, and we sort of decided to up the focus on rain a little bit because we looked and saw numerous flood warnings in force. And so obviously you're thinking, well, that rain is going to have a bigger impact. So that plays into it, things like pollen, air pollution, UV levels, all of those kind of things as well. So yeah, it's the kind of light, fluffy stuff, do I need my brolly, but also what is the weather going to mean for you and what action to an extent anyway, do I need to take. Now, one of the kind of complicating factors of our weather story, and one thing you might actually hear us talk about now more than we maybe would have done when I started doing the job, is uncertainty, because the atmosphere is inherently chaotic. It's the notion of the butterfly effect. I mentioned before, you take all the observational data, you put it into the computer comes up with an answer, but actually the computer doesn't come up with an answer. It might come up with multiple answers. There's a form of forecasting called ensemble forecasting, where you literally feed the same data into the computer, run it maybe 50 times under slightly different conditions, and it will come up with different answers to what the weather is going to do. And there are also different computers. So on the screen, you can see on the left, the American GFS models forecast prediction for Saturday at 12 o'clock, 12 noon. And then on the right, you can see the European ECMWF model prediction for 12 o'clock. Now this actually, at this range, Saturday's still a few days away. This is kind of a situation where I wouldn't be talking hugely about uncertainty. Although the rain's in slightly different places, we can see there's a front coming in from the west. The timing might vary, but we can be, looking at just that information, fairly happy with that story. There'll be other times when uncertainty is sort of much more complicated and might have bigger impact. So I think of the time in 2022 when we had the UK's first 40-degree day, and from about 2 weeks before that day, certain computer weather models, some were hinting at some extremely high temperatures in the UK. But 2 weeks before, we were looking at that with our expertise and what we know about the UK climate, and kind of thinking, well, that doesn't seem very it certainly doesn't seem certain, but it actually seems very unlikely. But as that got closer to the event and computer models continued with that signal and more models came on board, the computer runs every 6 or 12 hours, depending on the model, we really firmed up on that, and we were able to kind of get that forecast nailed on quite early. But it's a process of evolving that uncertainty. As the uncertainty reduces, then that changes the way in which you tell stories. One other way of talking about uncertainty is obviously when you look at our BBC Weather app or our BBC Weather website, or indeed any weather app you might use, you'll see at the bottom of the screen there the probability of precipitation. Now, this is something that isn't always easy for audiences to get their head around, actually, but that literally means in that hour, on this situation, if we were in this situation 100 times, how many times would it rain? It's not how much of your area is covered by rainfall or how long in that hour, 82% of the hour. No, that's not what it's saying. It's just in that hour, there is an 82% chance of rain. It's easy when you've got the broadcast element to use. When you're on TV or radio, you can use your language to be transparent about that uncertainty. But we've had to be a bit cleverer to find different ways in doing that when we're sort of displaying products visually as on our website. And I guess that's always something to think about as well. What is the medium that you're trying to get your message across on, and how do I need to adapt what I'm doing to reflect that? Now, one thing that's changed in the time I've been doing the weather, and this has been a really big change, is the emphasis that we now place on climate change. And I'm quite fortunate that in my job, I've been given lots of opportunity to get involved in climate stories. And it's kind of one of my roles here now is to kind of lead on our climate coverage within weather. Because when I started, it used to be that the weather was over there and that was what weather talked about. And then the climate was over there. And actually, we didn't really ever bridge that divide. But now, knowledge has moved on. Our style of going about things has moved on, and we now reflect, or we try to reflect, climate change in our weather bulletins. The 40-degree day that I referred to earlier is the classic example of that, because heat waves are one of the easiest things to attribute to climate change. And so we were mentioning that in our broadcasts. But having to communicate not only weather, but climate brings its own set of communication challenges. So, for example, the graph on the right, which is global air temperature anomalies, basically, how far above average is the temperature. And you can see the white line there, and that's the start of 24. And our temperatures are not only way above average, but they are more above average than they have been in the past. But just display that graph to people, and they are going to kind of quite rightly wonder what's going on and what is it you're trying to tell them. So with these abstract concepts and quite complex data sets, we have to find ways to make it relevant. So we try and kind of major on the things that are going to affect people's lives. And the two major things in the UK are about flooding, and there will be more flooding. We're already seeing it, and also higher temperatures in the wintertime and in the summertime. But also, for example, the story I was working on a couple of weeks ago was about decreasing amounts of frost. And okay, we get less ground frost than we used to. In fact, we get 3 weeks fewer ground frosts than we used to 50 years ago, which I found pretty surprising. But what we then had to do was find, well, what does that mean in the world? And actually, we went to talk to some people who grow apple trees at Kew Gardens, and there are certain types of apples that are now harder to grow in the UK because they need that chill time, as the gardeners called it, in the winter to really spring forth with big juicy apples in the spring and the summer. And so they're having to adapt to that and maybe grow different species. So that's, we thought, something that actually people can use. And if you think, well, your supermarket apples are going to become harder to get hold of, or maybe that's going to make you sit up and take notice. But there is the risk of scaring people. And in my experience, if you tell people things that are too scary, they just shut their ears and won't listen to you anymore. So that's another challenge. Keeping emotions in check. Climate change can be an emotive thing for people who care about the weather and the climate, and often bringing your emotions into these things is not very helpful. So that's one challenge. And also, as I mentioned really at the start, the complexity of the science that we're dealing with. One other aspect, we have to be really careful with attribution. It would be really easy to go around every time there was flooding or every time we had a hot or a mild day saying, oh, well, that's because of climate change. That is not how attribution works. In the olden days, and when I say that, I mean maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we used to be really reluctant to attribute anything immediately. There had to be an attribution study that would go away, think about it for a while, peer-reviewed research, etc., before we could say something. Now there are things we can say more quickly, but we have to be careful not to attribute every single extreme weather event to climate change, because if we just say everything is climate change, the audience rightly lose trust in us. And it's a bit like the boy that cried wolf, isn't it? And then also, obviously, the challenges of skepticism and denialism. And that particularly has been an issue for some of my colleagues on social media, because obviously people have a very easy platform to get in touch with you and tell you exactly what they think. And that is another challenge, trying to keep your head while all of that's going on, because again, in my experience, what you see and hear on social media is not the majority. It's a vocal minority. You have to listen to what they say. Sometimes they make good points, but don't let that sort of sway your coverage. A couple of things to say about climate change, really. February 2024 was the warmest February on record across the globe. And it's the 9th month in a row now that we've had the warmest X month on record. So January, December, going back 9 months, every month has been the warmest on record. And not only that, the temperature now is running above 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, which of course was the notional limit set by the Paris Climate Change Agreement. If that pattern continues, obviously it will be decreed that we break that limit, but that's not going to happen straight away. But that's one of the big things we're watching. And then also sea surface temperatures is something that's really bothering a lot of scientists now, because as you can see from the black line, sea surface temperatures are running way above where they have been, way above anything we've seen in the past, and a lot of scientists don't fully understand the reasons why. And so that is giving some concerns for the future of the climate, and whether we've reached something that we call a tipping point. And tipping points is where you've changed the climate system in such a way that you've kind of gone over the edge of the cliff. And the trouble with tipping points is we don't always know that we've reached them until we've gone beyond them. So those are some of the climate things that, alongside my weather job and our weather jobs here at the BBC, we are also keeping an eye on. So I'm going to wrap up shortly, but please ask all the questions, and no question is too stupid or too small. I can't see what's in the chat, but I can see that there are a few. But just to sum up, really, my tips for communicating complex science, to boil this down, first thing is know your stuff. So brief yourself properly on what you want to say, because you never know when you're going to get a question. I might catch myself out here with the questions coming up, but you never know when you're going to get a question. And if you're not researched well enough, well, maybe you're going to fall foul of that. Know your audience, because the two ends of the spectrum really are other scientists, and you'll have a very different conversation with them compared with say, a class of school children. And obviously there's a huge spectrum between the two. And so who are you talking to, and how do you really focus your message? And what is that message? Know the points you want to get across. It's all very well knowing your stuff, but know the points you want to make. Use the right language, and be transparent about uncertainty. It's much better, and we do this a lot more in our weather forecast now, to say when we're not sure of something, explain why we're not sure of it, than to go brazenly out and say something that you know might not be quite right. I think those are probably the main points I wanted to make. So I'll hand back to Chris.
Thanks, Ben. I'll just stop the recording there.